meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. How y'all doing today? Everybody awake?
Yeah.
Yes? It's a great day to sleep in, so I'm really glad you're here. I'm glad you're here for lots of reasons, but especially because I'm going to do something I never do in a sermon, and that is start with a joke. One of the reasons I don't start with jokes is because I'm no good at telling them. And another reason I don't start with jokes is because I tend to think they're way funnier than they actually are. So it always feels a little awkward. But today I couldn't help myself. So here it is. A terrible storm came into a town, and local officials sent out an emergency warning that the riverbanks would soon overflow and flood the nearby homes. They ordered everyone in the town to evacuate immediately. A faithful Christian man heard the warning and decided to stay, saying to himself, "I will trust God, that if I am in danger, God will send a divine miracle to save me." The neighbors came by his house and said to him, "We're leaving, and there is room for you in our car. Please come with us." But the man declined. "I have faith that God will save me." As the man stood on his porch, watching the water rise up the steps, a man in a canoe paddled by and said to him, "Hurry and come into the canoe. The waters are rising quickly." But the man said again, "No thanks. God will save me." The flood waters rose higher, pouring water into his living room, and the man had to retreat to the second floor. A police motorboat came by, saw him at the window, and said, "We will come up and rescue you." They shouted, but the man refused, waving them off and saying, "Use your time to save someone else who really needs it. I have faith that God will save me." The flood waters rose higher and higher, and the man had to climb up to his rooftop. A helicopter spotted him and dropped a rope ladder. A rescue officer came down the ladder and pleaded with the man, "Grab my hands and I will pull you up." But the man still refused, folding his arms tightly to his body and saying, "No, thank you. God will save me." Shortly after, the house broke up and the flood waters swept the man away and he drowned. When in heaven, the man stood before God and asked, "I put all my faith in you. Why didn't you come and save me?" And God said, "Son, I sent you a warning, I sent you a car, a canoe, a motorboat, I even sent you a helicopter. What more were you looking for?" Have you heard that one before? Yeah, it's a pretty good one. I've been thinking about that joke this week as I have been hearing the news about the measles outbreak that's going around right now. Measles, which we have a great vaccination for. I've been thinking about that with the terrible news of the Jordanian man who was burned to death on film. I've been thinking about that in relation to the violence going on in Nigeria. Do you remember those 200 and some odd girls that were kidnapped? I mean, they're still missing. And we have a pretty good idea of what's happening to them, right? It's not good. And the same group that kidnapped those girls is now, there's been so much violence in Nigeria at their hand that they've had to cancel their election. And I've been thinking about that joke in relationship to what's going on in the Ukraine and the peace talks there that seem unlikely to stick. And I've been wondering, where is God? Where is this Jesus who goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath and encounters the man with the unclean spirit and casts that spirit away? And that was from last Sunday. And our gospel today picks up on the next verse. So it's still the Sabbath, and Jesus has just left the synagogue, and he goes to Simon's house, which, by the way, is about if I was standing in the synagogue in Capernaum, Simon's house is about where Jim Wilson is sitting back there. I mean, it's not far. It's a tiny little town. So where is this Jesus that goes to Simon's house and heals his sick mother-in-law? Simply by reaching out his hand and pulling her to her feet. Where is Jesus, who drew all these crowds to this house to heal them? Where is Jesus, who wouldn't stay in one place, but put the burden on himself to go out and spread the good news throughout the entire region of Galilee, though only after finding some solid time in prayer? Where is this Jesus that heals, preaches, teaches, and restores life? What has happened to him in our day and age? The way we can get our head around these questions, I think, is through Simon's mother-in-law. Now that's a sticky part in today's gospel, the healing of the mother-in-law. I don't know if you caught it, but the gospel basically says that the fever left her and she began to serve them. Many of us are going to chafe at that. It's like, does she not get any time to recover? It's very handy that now she's well and can make dinner for all the guys, right? But I think there's a different way to look at it. The story of the healing of Simon's mother-in-law comes right at the beginning of Mark, so we're still in the first chapter. There's no miraculous birth narrative. There's no stories of the boy Jesus visiting the temple. None of that. Mark starts with baptism, hits the ground running, and that's it, right into the heart of Jesus' ministry. I think the story of the healing of Simon's mother-in-law is the beginning of what the rest of the gospel will show us and will teach us about who Jesus is. Jesus is the one who pulls us from sin and death into love and life. Now, we know this, right? I mean, we all know this here. You are here because you've had some kind of experience or know this in some way inside of you. This pulling us out of sin and death and into love and life is, of course, ultimately what Jesus will do with his own life. But he does it first with Simon's mother-in-law. He returns her to life, and how does she respond? She responds by service. She receives the grace of God and turns that grace into faithful action. Now, the end of that joke is actually, I think, remarkably poignant. It's a silly joke, and it sure makes fun of us people of faith. But I think it also teaches us something important. God comes to us in so many different ways. Grace is always around the corner, just waiting for us. God is always there, wanting to break into our lives and do amazing things. Just like the joke, the only thing that limits us is us. The only thing that limits us is our perspective. So the question I have is, are we being Christ for others? Are we being the person in that joke who sends the warning or offers a ride in the car or shows up in the canoe or the motorboat or the helicopter? Are we that neighbor? Does our faith not only bring us solace and comfort, but also strength and courage? Perhaps if we were a little bit more like Simon's mother-in-law and took the grace of God that comes to us not as something that we hold on to, but as something that compels us into action, the world might start looking a little different. In fact, the world might really be different if just a few of us began to see ourselves not as served by God, but as those who serve others in God's name.